At the family reunion, my relatives made me serve food like I was the hired help, while they lounged in designer clothes and shared success stories. They always treated me like this, until a stretch limousine pulled up and the CEO of my company stepped out, calling my name. The stunned silence as my uncle dropped his champagne glass was just the beginning of how everything changed that day. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. I stood frozen in the middle of my Aunt Vivian's sprawling backyard, a heavy tray of hors d'oeuvres balanced awkwardly in my hands. 30 pairs of eyes shifted from the sleek black limousine to my face as Richard Matthews, CEO of Horizon Technologies and one of the most influential tech executives in the country, walked straight toward me with his hand extended. "There you are, Maya. I've been looking everywhere for you," he said, his voice cutting through the stunned silence. "Did you bring the presentation for Monday's board meeting? I need your brilliant perspective before we move forward." My cousin Daphne choked on her drink. Aunt Vivian's perfectly penciled eyebrows shot up so high they nearly disappeared into her hairline. Uncle Gregory, who had spent the last hour loudly discussing his recent promotion to regional manager, dropped his champagne flute. It shattered against the imported stone patio, but nobody moved to clean it up. Just 15 minutes earlier, Aunt Vivian had thrust the heavy silver tray into my hands with barely a glance in my direction. "Make yourself useful for once and pass these around," she'd said with that dismissive tone she'd perfected over decades of treating me like an inconvenience. "And try not to drop anything. Those are Waterford plates." I had swallowed my pride. Like I always did at these annual Cooper family reunions, nodded silently, and begun making my way through clusters of relatives who barely acknowledged me, except to pluck crab puffs from my tray without saying thank you. I was invisible, until I wasn't. Richard's unexpected appearance transformed me from family disappointment to someone suddenly worth noticing. The whiplash was almost comical. I'd been working at Horizon Technologies for 3 years, but I'd never mentioned to my family that I'd recently been promoted to senior innovation strategist, reporting directly to the executive team. What would have been the point? They'd never believed in my potential before. I carefully set the tray down on a nearby table and wiped my palms against my simple blue dress, the one cousin Daphne had earlier described as quaint, with a pitying smile. I extended my hand to Richard, trying to maintain professional composure despite the earthquake happening inside me. "Mr. Matthews, what a surprise," I managed, my voice steadier than I expected. "I have the presentation in my car, actually." Richard smiled, the kind of smile that graced magazine covers and inspired confidence in shareholders. "Excellent. Always prepared. This is exactly why you're leading the Nexus project." He turned to the stunned faces around us. "You must be Maya's family. She's been incredibly modest about her accomplishments, hasn't she?" The silence that followed was deafening. I could almost hear the mental calculations as relatives desperately tried to reconcile the Maya they'd dismissed, the one they'd relegated to serving duties, with the Maya who apparently had the ear of Richard Matthews. Aunt Vivian recovered. First, sliding forward with a smile I'd never seen directed at me before. "Richard, welcome to our humble gathering," she said, as if the 6-bedroom estate with its Olympic-sized pool and manicured gardens was something quaint. "We're all so proud of Maya, of course. She's always been the family's little secret genius." I felt my throat tighten. 20 years of being compared unfavorably to my cousins. 20 years of snide comments about my career choices, my appearance, my modest apartment, all suddenly erased in Aunt Vivian's selective memory. Richard's hand settled firmly on my shoulder. "Secret? That's surprising. At Horizon, Maya's reputation is anything but secret." The Nexus project she's heading is poised to transform our entire industry. But I'm interrupting your family time. Before I could respond, my cousin Daphne materialized at my side. Champagne glass magically refilled. Maya never tells us anything about her work, she said with a practiced laugh. So modest. But we'd love to hear more, wouldn't we, everyone? The family circle tightened around us like a noose, faces suddenly alight with interest. Uncle Gregory appeared, brushing imaginary lint from his sport coat. I've been following Horizon's stock performance closely, he announced, as if he and Richard were old investing buddies. Impressive quarterly results. Richard nodded politely but kept his attention on me. Maya, I apologize for crashing your family event, but after our call this morning, I realized we needed to revise the approach to the Singapore presentation. I was in the neighborhood for another meeting and thought I might catch you here. He checked his watch. Do you have a few minutes to discuss it? The board meets first thing Monday morning. Before I could answer, Aunt Vivian interjected. Maya, dear, why don't you and Mr. Matthews use the study? It's quiet, and you'll have privacy for your important business. Her voice dripped with newfound respect. I glanced at the tray of hors d'oeuvres I'd been ordered to serve just moments ago, then back at my aunt's expectant face. Something shifted inside me. A lifetime of accommodating their dismissive treatment suddenly crystallized into perfect clarity. Thank you, Aunt Vivian, but I think the gazebo would be better, I said calmly. After all, I wouldn't want to miss my serving duties. That's what I'm here for, isn't it? The color drained from her face. Several relatives suddenly became very interested in the patterns on their shoes. Richard glanced between us, his shrewd eyes missing nothing. The gazebo sounds perfect, he said smoothly, either missing or, more likely, choosing to ignore the sudden tension. Lead the way, Maya. As we walked across the lawn, I could feel the weight of 30 stares boring into my back. The last thing I heard before we moved out of earshot was Cousin Daphne's stage whisper, Since when does Maya know Richard Matthews? I thought she was just an assistant or something. The gazebo sat at the far end of the property, overlooking a small, decorative pond. As we settled into the wicker chairs, Richard immediately dropped the urgent pretense. I'm sorry for barging in, Maya, he said with a genuine smile. But when I dropped Elaine off at her charity luncheon next door and she mentioned this was the Cooper estate, I remembered you saying your family reunion was this weekend. I thought I'd stop by and say hello. He paused, studying my face. Though I'm beginning to think my timing was either terrible or impeccable, depending on your perspective. I didn't know whether to laugh or cry. Richard Matthews, CEO of a Fortune 500 company, had essentially rescued me from my own family's condescension. It was impeccable, I admitted, though now I'll never hear the end of it. Family dynamics can be complicated, he offered diplomatically. I laughed, a short, sharp sound that surprised even me. Not that complicated. They think I'm a failure. Because I didn't follow the Cooper family blueprint. Prestigious law firm, marriage to someone from the right family, house in the right neighborhood. I gestured vaguely toward the main house. I chose technology instead. Creative work, independence. So I get to serve appetizers at family gatherings while everyone else exchanges success stories. Richard was quiet for a moment, his gaze thoughtful. You know, when I hired you, your resume wasn't what impressed me most. It was your answer to my question about failure. I remembered that interview, my hands shaking as I sat across from the Richard Matthews, certain I was underqualified despite my credentials. You asked me about my biggest failure, I recalled. He nodded. And unlike every other candidate who tried to disguise a strength as a weakness, you told me about a genuine failure, that app you developed in graduate school that crashed and lost everyone's data. It was a disaster, I said, smiling at the memory that had once been painful. But then you explained how you'd learned from it, rebuilt it, and made it better. That's when I knew you were right for Horizon. He leaned forward. People who've never failed often crumble when they finally do. People who've already faced failure and survived. They're the ones who innovate, who take necessary risks. A commotion near the house drew our attention. More relatives had arrived, and Aunt Vivian was loudly directing them toward the gazebo, pointing animatedly in our direction. "I think you're about to have company," Richard observed with amusement. I sighed. "They'll be falling over themselves to impress you." "Well, since I've thoroughly disrupted your family reunion, the least I can do is give you a graceful exit." He stood and offered his hand to help me up. "We really do have that board meeting Monday, and I really would value your input on the Singapore approach. Why don't you grab that presentation from your car and we can discuss it over dinner? There's a new Japanese fusion place downtown I've been meaning to try." Before I could respond, a small procession led by Aunt Vivian was making its way toward us across the lawn. I made a quick decision. "I'd appreciate that very much, Mr. Matthews," I said formally, loud enough for the approaching relatives to hear. "Please, it's Richard," he corrected with a wink that only I could see. "After all, we'll be working closely together on this project for months." As my relatives reached us, their faces arranged in expressions of exaggerated interest and newfound respect, I felt something shift inside me. For years, I had accepted their judgment, their dismissal, their relegation of me to the role of family disappointment. I had internalized their narrative that I was somehow less than they were because I'd chosen a different path. But standing there, watching them scramble to revise their opinion of me based solely on Richard's presence, I realized something profound. Their approval had never been the measure of my worth. Their validation had never been necessary for my success. Aunt Vivian stepped forward, her voice saccharine. "Richard, we simply cannot let you steal Maya away so soon. The family has barely had a chance to catch up with her." She linked her arm through mine possessively, as if we'd always been the closest of confidants. I gently but firmly extricated myself. "Actually, Aunt Vivian, I need to go. Mr. Matthews and I have urgent business to discuss before Monday's board meeting." Her smile faltered. "But you've barely been here 2 hours. What about dessert? Gregory brought those imported chocolates you always loved as a child." I couldn't remember Uncle Gregory ever noticing what I liked or didn't like. "I'm sorry, but this is important." Cousin Daphne pushed forward. "Maya, can't your boss understand that family comes first?" The irony of her statement was breathtaking. Richard, to his credit, played along perfectly. "I do apologize for the interruption, but the Singapore deal represents a significant opportunity, and Maya's input is crucial." He turned to me. "Your car or mine?" "I'll follow you," I said, suddenly eager to leave the stifling atmosphere of judgment and sudden, transparent approval. As we walked toward the front of the house, relatives trailing like a reluctant parade, Uncle Gregory attempted one last power play. "Richard, perhaps you could join us next month at the lake house. I'd love to discuss some investment opportunities I've been considering." Richard smiled politely. "My schedule is quite full, but thank you for the invitation." He turned to me. "Maya has my calendar, though. Perhaps she can find a suitable date if time permits." The look on Uncle Gregory's face, the realization that he would need to go through me, the family servant, to access Richard, was worth every moment of humiliation I'd endured earlier. At the front drive, Richard's chauffeur had the limousine waiting. He opened the door as Richard approached. "I'll see you at Nobu in an hour?" Richard confirmed. I nodded, suddenly unable to speak past the lump in my throat. This simple act, of respect, of being treated as a valued colleague rather than a disappointment, felt revolutionary after years of family conditioning. As I walked to my modest Honda Civic parked among the BMWs and Mercedes, I heard Aunt Vivian's stage whisper, "Why didn't you tell us Maya was working directly with Richard Matthews?" All this time, we thought she was just some sort of computer technician. My cousin Trevor's reply was equally audible. She never said anything. always acted like her job was nothing special. I slid into my car, closed the door on their voices, and for the first time all day, took a deep breath. My hands were shaking, but not from shame or embarrassment. They were shaking with the realization that I'd finally stopped seeking approval from people who had never intended to give it. As I started the engine, I caught a glimpse of my reflection in the rearview mirror. The woman looking back at me wasn't the family disappointment or the reluctant server of appetizers. She was the senior innovation strategist at Horizon Technologies, hand-selected by Richard Matthews to lead a groundbreaking project. She had always been there. I just hadn't fully embraced her until now. I pulled away from Aunt Vivian's perfect house, watching in my rearview mirror as family members stood clustered in the driveway, still processing what had happened. Their image grew smaller and smaller until they disappeared completely, much like the power they had held over me for so long. For the first time in 20 years of family reunions, I drove away feeling not diminished, but expanded. Not judged, but freed. Not less, but more. And that was just the beginning of how everything changed. The morning of the family reunion dawned bright and clear, sunlight streaming through my bedroom curtains like an optimistic messenger. I lay in bed for a few extra moments, mentally preparing for the day ahead. The annual Cooper family gathering was a tradition stretching back decades, and one that I approached with a complex mixture of obligation and dread. I pulled myself out of bed and padded to the kitchen of my apartment, making coffee while scrolling through work emails. A message from Richard Matthews, CEO of Horizon Technologies and my direct boss since my promotion 3 months ago, caught my attention. Don't forget the Singapore presentation for Monday's board meeting. Your insights on the cultural adaptation strategy will be crucial. I smiled to myself, feeling a familiar warmth of professional validation. At work, my opinions mattered. My intelligence was respected. My contributions were valued. The contrast with how I was treated at Cooper family gatherings couldn't have been more stark. 2 hours later, I pulled up to Aunt Vivian's sprawling estate in the prestigious Oakwood Hills neighborhood, my modest Honda Civic looking out of, place among the luxury vehicles already lining the circular driveway. I checked my appearance one last time in the rearview mirror. Simple blue dress, minimal makeup, hair pulled back in a neat bun. Professional but understated, nothing that would give Aunt Vivian an excuse to comment on me looking too done up or not trying hard enough. The front door opened before I could knock, revealing my cousin Daphne in a designer dress that probably cost more than my monthly rent. Her eyes performed their usual quick assessment, cataloging everything from my sensible shoes to my lack of expensive jewelry. "Maya, you made it." She air-kissed both my cheeks. "We were beginning to wonder if you were coming. Everyone else arrived ages ago." I checked my watch. "It's only 15 minutes past the start time, Daphne." She waved her hand dismissively. "Well, you know what they say. Early is on time is late." She lowered her voice conspiratorially. "Love the dress. So practical. You always were good at making the most of a limited budget." And there it was, the first subtle dig, so skillfully delivered that responding would only make me seem oversensitive. I'd learned over the years to let these comments slide, to preserve whatever peace could be maintained during these family obligations. I followed Daphne through the marble-floored foyer into the backyard, where the reunion was in full swing. Aunt Vivian had spared no expense as usual. White linen-covered tables dotted the immaculate lawn. A catering staff in crisp uniforms circulated with trays of appetizers, and a string quartet played softly near the rose garden. About 30 Cooper relatives mingled in clusters, champagne flutes in hand, engaged in the familiar competition of subtle one-upmanship that defined our family gatherings. My mother spotted me from across the lawn and hurried over, her smile tight with anxiety. "Maya, there you are. You're late. Your aunt has been asking where you were." I'm 15 minutes late, Mom. Hardly a crisis. She straightened my collar unnecessarily. You know how Vivian feels about punctuality. And did you bring the fruit salad I asked you to make? I held up the glass bowl I was carrying. Right here. Good. Put it on the buffet table and then come say hello to everyone. Your cousin Patricia's husband just made partner at his law firm, and Trevor is finishing his final year at Harvard Law. Everyone's so excited about their news. The subtext was clear, as always. Everyone else is achieving the kind of conventional success the Coopers value. What have you done lately? I placed my fruit salad on the table next to elaborate catered dishes that made my contribution look amateur by comparison. As I turned to join the gathering, Aunt Vivian intercepted me, champagne in hand, diamonds glittering at her throat. Maya, there you are at last. We were about to send out a search party. She air-kissed me much as Daphne had done. You look healthy. I think that dress has seen a few reunions now, hasn't it? It has, I acknowledged, refusing to be embarrassed by something as trivial as wearing the same perfectly good dress more than once. She sipped her champagne, eyeing me over the rim of her glass. And how's that little computer job of yours? Still doing? What is it exactly? Something with websites? I had explained my role at Horizon Technologies at least a dozen times to various family members over the years. No one ever seemed to retain the information, perhaps because it didn't fit their narrative of me as the underachieving Cooper. I work in innovation strategy for Horizon Technologies. We're developing new approaches to technological integration across cultural contexts. Sounds very technical, she said with the air of someone humoring a child. Well, as long as it pays the bills. Before I could respond, she glanced over my shoulder and her expression brightened considerably. Oh, Gregory's waving me over. We're discussing his new position at the firm. Regional manager now, you know. You should come congratulate him. She swept away, leaving me alone with the distinct impression that my congratulations were neither required nor particularly desired. I made my way through the gathering, exchanging pleasantries with relatives who seemed to have a collective amnesia about what I actually did for a living. Still working with computers? My uncle asked. Such a shame you never went to law school like we suggested, my grandmother lamented. Any serious relationship on the horizon? A cousin inquired, as if my professional achievements meant nothing without a ring on my finger. An hour into the reunion, I had settled into the familiar role of Cooper family outsider, present but peripheral, acknowledged but not fully seen. I found myself gravitating toward the edges of conversations, smiling politely, offering congratulations for promotions and graduations and engagements, but never quite breaking through the invisible barrier that had always existed between me and the rest of the Coopers. I was contemplating a graceful early exit when Aunt Vivian approached me with purpose, a silver tray of hors d'oeuvres in her hands. Maya, be a dear and take over serving these. Marguerite needs to rearrange the dessert table, and everyone else is catching up. She thrust the tray into my hands without waiting for a response and glided away, calling out to a group of older relatives near the rose garden. I stood there for a moment, the heavy silver tray balanced awkwardly in my hands, feeling a familiar mix of resignation and resentment. This was classic Aunt Vivian, assigning me the role of helper rather than participant, servant rather than family member. It was subtle enough that objecting would seem petty, yet pointed enough that the power dynamic was unmistakable. Taking a deep breath, I began circulating with the tray, offering appetizers to relatives who barely glanced at me as they took their selections. I was 3/4 of the way around the garden when I overheard a conversation that stopped me in my tracks. Did you see Maya is serving again? Classic. It was my cousin Daphne's voice, pitched low but not quite low enough. Aunt Vivian says she's never really found her place. Such a shame. Well, not everyone can be successful, another voice responded. Patricia, I thought. At least she seems content with her little tech job. Some people just have more modest ambitions. I felt heat rise to my face, a mixture of embarrassment and anger that I had swallowed so many times before at these gatherings. But something was different today. Perhaps it was the contrast between this dismissal and the email from Richard, valuing my expertise. Perhaps it was simply that after years of diminishment, something in me had finally reached its breaking point. Whatever the reason, I found myself making a decision that would alter the course of the day, and much more, in ways I couldn't yet imagine. I walked deliberately to the nearest table, set down the tray with a soft clink, and headed for the Sina bar. I needed a moment to collect myself, to decide whether to confront the lifetime of subtle denigration or simply make an early exit. The bartender, a young man hired for the event, gave me a sympathetic smile as he handed me a glass of water. "Family gatherings, right?" he said quietly. "Always more complicated than they look from the outside." I returned his smile, grateful for the small moment of human connection. "You have no idea." "Actually, I might," he replied. "I'm working my way through business school. My family thinks I'm wasting my time because I didn't go the medical route like my brothers." He shrugged. "But hey, in 5 years they'll either get it or they won't. I'll still be doing what I love." His simple confidence struck a chord. Here was someone who had decided that external validation wasn't the measure of his choices, who understood that sometimes the path of authenticity requires disappointing others' expectations. "What kind of business are you interested in?" I asked, genuinely curious. "Technology integration, actually, especially how different cultural contexts affect implementation strategies." His eyes lit up with enthusiasm. "There's this company, Horizon Technologies, that's doing groundbreaking work in that area. I'm hoping to intern there next summer." The coincidence was so perfect I almost laughed. "I work at Horizon," I said, "in the Innovation Strategy Department." His eyes widened. "Seriously? That's amazing. I've read every article Richard Matthews has published on cross-cultural tech adaptation. His approach to the Eastern European expansion last year was brilliant." "I led that project team," I said, the words feeling strange in my mouth. Not because they weren't true, but because I so rarely spoke about my professional accomplishments in this setting, where they were routinely minimized or ignored. "No way. The integration model you developed is literally the case study we're examining in my advanced strategy seminar this semester." He looked at me with genuine respect, something I rarely experienced within the Cooper family circle. "Professor Lin says it's revolutionizing how multinational tech companies approach cultural differences in implementation." Before I could respond, a commotion near the front of the house caught everyone's attention. A sleek black limousine had pulled into the circular driveway, its polished surface gleaming in the afternoon sun. As the driver opened the rear door, a tall figure emerged. Richard Matthews, CEO of Horizon Technologies, and one of the most recognizable figures in the tech industry. A buzz of curious whispers swept through the gathering. Aunt Vivian, ever attuned to the arrival of potential social capital, was already moving toward the front path, a practiced smile of welcome on her face. I stood frozen by the bar, trying to process what I was seeing. Why was Richard here? How did he even know about the reunion, let alone where it was being held? The bartender looked from Richard to me and back again, his expression odd. "Is that Richard Matthews? Coming to your family reunion?" "It appears so," I managed, still stunned, though I have no idea why. Richard was now making his way into the backyard, Aunt Vivian fluttering beside him, clearly delighted by the unexpected arrival of such a prestigious guest. His eyes scanned the gathering, passing over cluster after cluster of my relatives, until they landed on me. A smile of recognition lit his face, and he began walking directly toward me, weaving between groups of now silent Coopers who watched with undisguised curiosity. "Maya," he called as he approached. "I've been looking everywhere for you." Did you bring the presentation for Monday's board meeting? I need your brilliant perspective before we move forward. The silence that fell over the reunion was so complete, I could hear the fountain bubbling at the far end of the garden. Every eye turned toward me, expressions ranging from confusion to disbelief to sudden calculating interest. Aunt Vivian, who had been trailing behind Richard, stopped short, her perfectly composed facade slipping for just a moment. Uncle Gregory, who had been loudly holding court near the rose garden, was now watching with narrowed eyes, his champagne glass frozen halfway to his lips. "Mr. Matthews," I said, finding my voice at last. "What a surprise. I wasn't expecting to see you today." "I apologize for the intrusion," he said smoothly, extending his hand. "But after our call this morning, I realized we needed to revise the Singapore approach before Monday's presentation. I was in the neighborhood for another meeting and thought I might catch you here." As I shook his hand, I noticed Daphne and Patricia staring open-mouthed from across the lawn. The same cousins who had been dismissing my little tech job moments earlier were now witnessing the CEO of a Fortune 500 company seeking out my expertise. "Maya," Aunt Vivian interjected, her voice honey-sweet, "you didn't mention you were working directly with Richard Matthews." She emphasized his name slightly, making it clear she recognized the social and professional status he represented. Richard turned to her with a polite smile. "Maya is being modest as usual. She's leading our expansion into Singapore, a multi-billion-dollar initiative that's transforming how we approach global markets." He glanced back at me. "Her cultural integration strategy is revolutionary. The board is quite impressed." I could almost see the mental calculations happening behind my relatives' eyes as they processed this new information. The Maya they had dismissed, the one serving appetizers moments ago, the one whose career they couldn't quite remember or respect, was suddenly being reframed before their eyes. Uncle Gregory materialized at Aunt Vivian's side, hand extended, toward Richard. "Gregory Cooper," he announced, as if his name should mean something. "Maya's uncle. I've been following Horizon's market performance with great interest. Impressive quarterly results." "Thank you," Richard replied, his tone professionally cordial but without the warmth he had shown me. "Maya's team has been instrumental in our recent growth." "Maya's team?" My mother had joined the circle now, her expression a mixture of confusion and dawning pride. "You mean she works on your team?" Richard raised an eyebrow. "Actually, Maya leads the Innovation Strategy Division. She reports directly to me and the board." The silence that followed was deafening. I could almost see my relatives reassessing every interaction they'd had with me, every dismissive comment, every time they'd relegated me to the edges of family gatherings or assigned me serving duties while celebrating others' accomplishments. Aunt Vivian recovered first, her social training kicking in. "Of course she does," she said smoothly, as if she had known all along. "Maya has always been the family's quiet achiever, so modest about her accomplishments." I caught Trevor's eye, across the lawn. Unlike the others, his expression held no calculation or sudden revision of his opinion. Instead, I saw something like recognition, perhaps even admiration. He gave me a small nod, one outsider to another, acknowledging what we both knew, that the family's sudden interest had nothing to do with genuine respect for my work, and everything to do with the external validation Richard's presence provided. "Maya," Richard said, apparently oblivious to the complex family dynamics unfolding around us, "do you have a few minutes to discuss the Singapore approach? The board is particularly interested in your cultural adaptation framework." Before I could respond, Aunt Vivian interjected, "You must use the study, Maya. It's quiet and private. Perfect for important business discussions." Her voice had transformed from the dismissive tone she typically used with me to one of exaggerated respect. I glanced at the silver tray of appetizers I had been ordered to serve just minutes earlier, then back at my aunt's expectant face. Something shifted inside me. A lifetime of accommodating their dismissive treatment suddenly crystallized into perfect clarity. Thank you, Aunt Vivian, I said calmly. But I think we'll use the gazebo instead. After all, I wouldn't want to miss my serving duties. I met her gaze directly. That's what I'm here for, isn't it? The color drained from her face. Several relatives suddenly became very interested in the patterns on their shoes. Richard glanced between us, his shrewd eyes missing nothing. The gazebo sounds perfect, he said smoothly, choosing to ignore the sudden tension. Lead the way, Maya. As we walked across the lawn, I felt the weight of 30 stares boring into my back. The last thing I heard before we moved out of earshot was Daphne's stage whisper. Did you know Maya was working directly with Richard Matthews? I thought she was just some sort of computer technician. The gazebo sat at the far end of the property, overlooking a small decorative pond. As we settled into the wicker chairs, Richard immediately dropped his urgent pretense. I hope I didn't cause a problem, he said, genuine concern in his voice. I recognized the address when my driver mentioned the neighborhood. You'd mentioned the family reunion was this weekend, and I thought I'd stop by to say hello on my way to another appointment. But I seem to have stepped into something complicated. I smiled ruefully. Family dynamics always are, aren't they? He nodded, studying me with unexpected perception. Maya, I've worked with you for 3 years. In that time, I've seen you confidently present to international boards, negotiate with tech giants, and lead teams through complex challenges. Yet the woman I just saw in that garden seemed diminished somehow. His observation struck a chord so deep I felt it physically. The Coopers have a very specific definition of success, I said carefully. My choices haven't aligned with their expectations. They've made it clear over the years that my work doesn't quite count. And yet your work is transforming an entire industry, Richard said. The Singapore strategy alone will likely become a case study in business schools for years to come. I laughed softly. Ironically, the bartender just told me it already is. He's studying our Eastern European expansion model in his graduate seminar, Richard smiled. See? External validation for what you already know. Your work matters, Maya. It has impact. He glanced back toward the main gathering. Though I'm curious, why have you never mentioned your accomplishments to your family? I considered his question carefully. I think I've been waiting for them to see me, really see me, without needing someone else to validate my worth, to recognize my achievements because they matter, not because an authority figure points them out. And has that worked? Richard asked gently. I looked toward the house, where clusters of relatives were now openly watching the gazebo, whispering among themselves. Clearly not, I admitted. But their sudden interest now feels hollow. It's not about respecting what I do. It's about who they think you are and what connection to you might offer them. Richard nodded thoughtfully. I've experienced something similar. When I first started in tech, my family thought I was throwing away my potential. After my first company went public, suddenly they were telling everyone they'd always supported my unique vision. He made air quotes around the phrase. How did you handle it? I asked. Poorly at first, he admitted. I vacillated between trying to prove them wrong and seeking their approval. Neither approach brought any real satisfaction. He leaned forward, his expression serious. The turning point came when I realized their opinion of my choices was a reflection of them, not me. My work had value whether they recognized it or not. His words resonated deeply. For years, I had carried the weight of the Cooper family's dismissal, allowing it to shadow my professional achievements and personal choices. I had compartmentalized my life, the respected executive at Horizon versus the family disappointment at Cooper gatherings, as if these were different versions of myself rather than different contexts, experiencing the same authentic person. I think I needed today, I said finally. Seeing their reaction when external validation suddenly made my work real to them. It clarified something I've felt but couldn't quite articulate. Which is? That I've been giving them power they haven't earned. The power to define my worth based on standards I don't actually value. I looked toward the main house, where Aunt Vivian was now animatedly directing several relatives, clearly discussing Richard's unexpected appearance and what it might mean. My work has meaning regardless of whether they understand or respect it. My choices have value because they align with my own integrity, not because they meet someone else's expectations. Richard smiled, a genuine expression of respect rather than the polite social mask he had worn with my relatives. That's a powerful realization, Maya, and if I may say so, long overdue. Movement near the house caught our attention. A small procession headed by Aunt Vivian was making its way toward the gazebo, their expressions arranged in careful masks of interest and newfound respect. "It seems we're about to have company," Richard observed with a touch of amusement. I made a quick decision. "Actually, I think I need to get back to work on the Singapore presentation. Since you're here, perhaps we could discuss it somewhere more conducive to actual thought." Richard checked his watch. "I'm free for the next few hours. There's a good cafe about 10 minutes from here. Quiet, excellent coffee, and no relatives with suddenly convenient investment opportunities to discuss." The approaching family members were close enough now that I could see Uncle Gregory straightening his tie, preparing for what he clearly hoped would be a profitable introduction. I stood, feeling lighter than I had at any family gathering in memory. "I'll get my portfolio from the car," I said. "The presentation needs a few adjustments before Monday." As my relatives reached the gazebo, their faces arranged in expressions of exaggerated interest and newfound respect, I felt something shift inside me. For years, I had accepted their judgment, their dismissal, their relegation of me to the role of family disappointment. I had internalized their narrative that I was somehow less than they were because I'd chosen a different path. But standing there, watching them scramble to revise their opinion of me based solely on Richard's presence, I realized something profound. Their approval had never been the measure of my worth. Their validation had never been necessary for my success. The Maya they had dismissed minutes earlier when she was serving appetizers was the same Maya whose strategies were revolutionizing an industry. The difference wasn't in me, but in their perception, a perception based not on my actual achievements, but on their narrow definition of what counted as success. And in that moment, I made a decision that would alter not just this day, but every interaction with my family going forward. I would no longer diminish myself to fit their expectations. I would no longer seek approval from those who only offered it conditionally. I would no longer apologize for choosing a path that honored my gifts rather than following their prescribed route. It wasn't about proving them wrong or seeking revenge for years of dismissal. It was about finally claiming the right to define my own worth, to stand firmly in the truth of who I was without apology or explanation. As Aunt Vivian approached, her voice saccharine, I prepared to step into a new chapter, not just professionally, but personally. One where I no longer needed external validation to recognize my own value. One where I could engage with my family from a place of authentic strength rather than habitual diminishment. The journey ahead wouldn't be easy. Old patterns rarely die without resistance. But for the first time in 20 years of family gatherings, I felt not invisible, not less, but completely, authentically enough. The drive to meet Richard at Nobu gave me time to process what had just happened. As I navigated through evening traffic, my mind replayed the moment when my family's perception of me had transformed before my eyes. Not because I had changed, but because someone else's validation had suddenly made me visible to them. The realization was both liberating and painful. For years, I had carried their dismissal like a weight around my neck, constantly trying to prove my worth while simultaneously accepting their narrative that I would never quite measure up. How many decisions had I second-guessed because Aunt Vivian's voice echoed in my head? How many achievements had I downplayed because Uncle Gregory had taught me that my successes didn't count in the Cooper family ledger? I pulled into the restaurant parking lot 15 minutes early and sat in my car, gathering my thoughts. My phone buzzed with notifications. 3 text messages from Daphne, 2 from my mother, and even 1 from Uncle Gregory, who had never texted me before today. I silenced the phone without reading them. Whatever newfound interest they had in me could wait. Inside Nobu, the host led me to a quiet corner table where Richard was already waiting. He stood as I approached, a gesture of respect that still felt unfamiliar after the treatment I'd received earlier. "Thank you for rescuing me," I said as I sat down. "That was above and beyond your duties as CEO." Richard smiled. "I'd say it was perfect timing, though I'm curious, why haven't you ever mentioned your family dynamics at work? You've been at Horizon for 3 years, and I had no idea." I picked up the menu, using it as a momentary shield. Professional boundaries, I suppose. Besides, what would I say? "Good morning. Just a reminder that my family thinks I'm a failure despite my degrees and accomplishments?" "Fair point," Richard conceded. "Though I wonder how many of us carry those invisible burdens to work every day." The waiter arrived to take our orders, and the conversation shifted to the Singapore presentation. For an hour, we discussed strategy and innovation, my mind fully engaged in the work I loved. It was like breathing fresh air after being underwater. This was where I felt competent, respected, heard. As we finished our meal, Richard leaned back in his chair. "Maya, may I speak candidly? Not as your CEO, but as someone who's been in the industry for 30 years? I nodded, curious. What I saw today reminded me of something I experienced early in my career. I came from a family of doctors, 3 generations of distinguished physicians. When I chose technology instead, my father didn't speak to me for 2 years. He smiled ruefully. He was convinced I was throwing my life away on a passing fad. This revelation surprised me. Richard Matthews, with his confident demeanor and seemingly effortless success, had never struck me as someone who'd faced familial disapproval. "What happened?" I asked. "I built my first company, sold it for 8 figures, and suddenly my family decided technology was a respectable field after all." He laughed, but there was an edge to it. The approval felt hollow by then. I'd already learned to find validation in my own accomplishments, not their recognition. I understood that hollowness all too well. "So what's the candid advice?" "Don't make the mistake I did," he said, his expression serious. "I spent years trying to prove them wrong, letting their disapproval fuel me. It worked. I built a successful career, but it came at a cost. I made decisions based on what would impress them rather than what fulfilled me. Don't let your family's treatment push you into living a life designed to change their minds. They might never change." His words hit home with unexpected force. Wasn't that exactly what I'd been doing? Working harder, achieving more, always with the subconscious hope that someday I'd do enough to earn their respect? "Then what's the alternative?" I asked. "Build a life that makes you proud, regardless of their opinion, and surround yourself with people who see your value without needing external proof." He glanced at his watch. "Speaking of which, I should let you go. I'm sure your evening plans don't involve business talk with your boss." I smiled wryly. "Actually, my evening plans involved being interrogated by relatives about why I never mentioned knowing you, then probably being asked to help clean up after the party." Richard raised an eyebrow. "And now? Now I think I'll go home, turn off my phone, and enjoy the rare pleasure of not caring what any Cooper thinks of me." I meant it as a joke, but the truth of it settled over me with surprising weight. After dinner, I drove home to my apartment in the Arts District, a converted warehouse space that Aunt Vivian had once described as bohemian in the tone one might use for infectious. But as I unlocked the door and stepped inside, I saw it through new eyes. The exposed brick walls, the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city lights, the collection of local artwork I'd curated over years. This space wasn't just where I lived. It was an expression of who I was, choices I'd made that had nothing to do with the Cooper family expectations. I kicked off my shoes and curled up on my oversized reading chair, finally checking my phone. The messages were predictably self-serving. Daphne. OMG, why didn't you tell us you're working with the Richard? Matthews? We need to catch up ASAP. Lunch next week? Mom. Maya, call me. Your aunt is upset that you left so abruptly. Richard seemed very impressive. Are you actually working directly with him? Uncle Gregory. Interesting development today. Let's discuss how we might leverage your connection. Lake House offer still stands for Matthews. I set the phone down without responding. For the first time, I saw their transparent attempts to connect with me not as the validation I'd always craved, but as the conditional approval they'd always offered, present only when I had something they wanted. My doorbell rang unexpectedly. Looking through the peephole, I was surprised to see my cousin Trevor, the quiet one, 3 years younger than me, who had always existed on the periphery of family gatherings much as I had. I opened the door cautiously. Trevor? How did you know where I live? He shifted uncomfortably. You brought me here once, remember? 3 years ago, when I was considering art school and wanted to see the district. He held up a familiar leather portfolio. You left this in your car, the presentation for Monday? I thought it might be important. I took the portfolio, genuinely touched by his thoughtfulness. You drove all the way here to return this? Well, that and... He hesitated. Can I come in for a minute? I stepped aside, letting him enter. Trevor had always been different from the rest of the Coopers, more creative, less concerned with appearances. He wandered over to my windows, looking out at the city view. This is still the coolest apartment I've ever seen, he said quietly. Thanks. The Coopers generally consider it proof of my financial irresponsibility. Trevor turned, his expression serious. I wanted to apologize for today, for all of it. The way they treated you, making you serve food, and then the way everyone suddenly changed when your boss showed up. It was embarrassing to watch. His candor surprised me. You don't owe me an apology, Trevor. You weren't the one ordering me around. No, but I didn't stop it either. He ran a hand through his hair, a nervous gesture I recognized from family gatherings. The thing is, Maya, I've always admired you. You're the only one who ever actually did what you wanted instead of what was expected. And today, seeing how quickly everyone changed when they realized you were successful by even their materialistic standards, it made me realize how toxic it all is. His words caught me off guard. The idea that anyone in the family had been watching me, seeing my choices as brave rather than foolish, had never occurred to me. What about you? I asked. Are you happy with your path? Trevor laughed without humor. I'm in my 3rd year of law school, hating every minute of it, while the portfolio of drawings I actually care about collects dust under my bed. So, no, not particularly happy. It's not too late to change direction, I said gently. Easy for you to say. You were always stronger than the rest of us. He gestured around my apartment. You built this life despite them. I'm still trying to figure out how to disappoint everyone and live with the fallout. I considered his words, thinking about the revelation I'd had earlier that day. Maybe that's the wrong framing, I suggested. It's not about disappointing them or proving them wrong. It's about recognizing that their approval was never the prize we thought it was. Trevor was quiet for a moment. What do you mean? I spent years thinking if I worked hard enough, achieved enough, someday they'd see my value. Today I realized that even when they suddenly showed interest in me, it didn't feel good because it wasn't about me at all. It was about what they thought I could do for them through Richard. Trevor nodded slowly. I noticed that. Uncle Gregory was already planning how to pitch his investment ideas before you even left the driveway. Exactly. So what would have happened if I'd finally earned their approval the way I always wanted? It still would have been conditional, still tied to how useful I was to them. I sat down on my couch, the truth of my words settling into me as I spoke them. The real freedom isn't in finally getting them to see me differently. It's in no longer needing them to. Trevor sat beside me, considering this. Is that why you never told anyone about your promotion? About working directly with Richard Matthews? I thought about it, examining my own motives honestly. Partly, I think I knew they'd only care because of who Richard is, not because of what the promotion said about my abilities. But also, I think I was protecting something precious from their judgment. This part of my life where I'm valued, for my mind, my ideas, I didn't want them to taint it. I get that, Trevor said quietly. Sometimes I don't tell them about things that matter to me because I don't want to hear their opinions. We sat in companionable silence for a moment, two outsiders within our own family finding unexpected common ground. So what happens now? Trevor finally asked. After today, they're going to see you differently. Maybe. Or maybe they'll convince themselves that Richard was exaggerating my role, that I just happened to be in the right place at the right time. The Coopers are remarkably skilled at reshaping reality to fit their preferences. True, Trevor conceded. But what about you? Will you go back to the next family gathering and let Aunt Vivian make you serve appetizers again? The question hit a nerve. What would I do the next time? Go back to Invisible Maya, the family disappointment. Now that I'd glimpsed my own worth through clearer eyes, could I really step back into the role they'd assigned me? I don't know, I admitted. But I do know I won't be responding to those texts tonight, pretending that their sudden interest is genuine. Trevor pulled out his phone. They've been blowing up the family group chat about you. Apparently, you're now the Cooper family success story that everyone always believed in. His tone was sardonic. Let me guess, Aunt Vivian is leading that revision of history? Of course. According to her latest message, she always knew you had potential if you'd just apply yourself properly. As if she hadn't spent every holiday for a decade asking when you were going to get a real job. I laughed, the sound bubbling up from somewhere genuine. The consistent inconsistency of the Cooper family narrative. Trevor put his phone away and stood up. I should go. Thanks for not kicking me out. Why would I kick you out? Because I'm a Cooper, and today made it pretty clear how Coopers have treated you. I stood as well, seeing him differently now. Not just as a cousin, but as possibly the one person in the family who might understand my journey. You brought my portfolio across town just to make sure I had it for Monday. That says something about what kind of Cooper you are. At the door, Trevor hesitated. Can I ask you something? How did you do it? Make the break? Choose your own path? It was a profound question, one I was still answering for myself. I think it happened in small steps. Each time I made a choice that honored what I wanted rather than what they expected, it got a little easier to make the next one. The hardest part wasn't actually doing it. It was carrying the weight of their disappointment while still believing I had made the right choice. And now, after today? I thought about Richard's advice, about the revelation I'd had watching my family transform their treatment of me based on external validation. Now I'm realizing that their disappointment was never mine to carry. Their opinions reflect their values, not my worth. Trevor nodded slowly. That's going to take some time to fully process. Tell me about it, I agreed with a small smile. 28 years of conditioning doesn't disappear in one afternoon. After Trevor left, I made myself a cup of tea and sat by the window, watching the city lights flicker against the night sky. My phone continued to buzz with notifications, but they felt distant now, like echoes from a life I was outgrowing. I opened my laptop and pulled up the presentation I would be delivering on Monday. The work I'd done, the strategy I'd developed, for Horizon's expansion into Asian markets represented months of research, creativity, and collaborative effort with my team. It was good work. Important work. Work I had earned the right to present, not because Richard Matthews had validated me in front of my judgmental family, but because I had consistently demonstrated my capabilities. As I made final adjustments to the slides, I realized something profound. For years, I had compartmentalized my life, Maya, the family disappointment, versus Maya, the rising tech executive, as if they were different versions of myself. But they weren't. I was one person who had made choices that aligned with my values rather than my family's expectations. The different treatment I received in each context wasn't a reflection of me changing. It was a reflection of the environments I had chosen to exist within. At work, I had surrounded myself with people who recognized and respected my contributions. I had built relationships based on mutual respect rather than obligation. I had created space for my talents to be seen and valued. With my family, I had accepted the role they had written for me, the failure, the cautionary tale, the one who served appetizers while others were served. I had continued to show up, hoping for different treatment while doing nothing to require it. But today, that pattern had been disrupted. Not just by Richard's appearance and the superficial change in my family's behavior, but by my own internal recognition that I deserved better. That recognition was the true beginning of transformation. My phone rang, cutting through my thoughts. It was my mother. After 4 rings, it went to voicemail, then immediately began ringing again. Classic Cooper persistence. On the 3rd attempt, I answered. "Hello, Mom." "Maya, finally. I've been trying to reach you for hours. Your aunt is very upset about how you left things today." "No, how are you?" No acknowledgement of how they had treated me. Just straight to Aunt Vivian's feelings. Some things never changed. "I'm sorry to hear that," I said, my voice neutral. I had an important work matter to address. "Yes, with Richard Matthews. Maya, why didn't you tell us you were working so closely with him? Do you know who his family is? His father was on the board of First National before he retired." Of course she would know his family connections. The Coopers always tracked such things with religious devotion. "I didn't mention it because my position at Horizon isn't about who I work with, Mom. It's about the work I do." She made an impatient sound. "Don't be naive, Maya. Connections are everything in business. Speaking of which, your uncle thinks—" Richard seemed quite interested in his investment proposal. "He's thinking of reaching out directly." I closed my eyes, gathering patience. "Richard was being polite, Mom. He doesn't know Uncle Gregory from Adam." "Well, that's where you come in, isn't it? You could facilitate an introduction. After all, family helps family." The irony was so thick I could almost touch it. Family helps family, except when the family was me, and the help I needed was basic respect. "Mom," I said carefully, "I need to go. I have an important presentation on Monday that requires my attention." "You're always so focused on work," she said, the familiar dismissive tone creeping back in. "But this matters too, Maya. Family matters." In that moment, I felt a clarity I had never experienced before. "Yes, it does," I agreed. "Which is why I'm going to say this once, and I hope you'll really hear it. I will not be using my professional relationships to advance Uncle Gregory's personal interests. I will not be apologizing to Aunt Vivian for leaving when I had legitimate work to do, and I will not be attending any more family gatherings where I'm treated as less valuable than everyone else in the room." The silence on the other end was profound. When my mother finally spoke, her voice was tight with shock. "I don't know where this attitude is coming from, but it's coming from self-respect, Mom, something I should have embraced a long time ago." "Is this because of what Vivian said? About serving the appetizers? You're being overly sensitive. Someone has to help at these gatherings. It's not about the appetizers, Mom. It's about a pattern of treatment that I've accepted for far too long. I love you, but I need to go now. I'll call you next week when we've both had some time to reflect. I ended the call before she could respond, my heart pounding but my mind clear. For the first time in my adult life, I had set a boundary with my family that prioritized my well-being over their expectations. It wasn't a dramatic cutting of ties or a heated confrontation, just a quiet, firm statement of what I would and would not accept going forward. My hands were shaking slightly as I set down the phone, but it wasn't from fear or regret. It was from recognition of my own power. Not power over others, but power over my own life, my own choices, my own standards for how I deserve to be treated. The realization was both simple and profound. I had always had this power. I had just never fully claimed it before. I turned back to my presentation, but my mind kept returning to the events of the day. Not just the external drama of Richard's appearance and my family's reaction, but the internal shift that had occurred within me. Something fundamental had changed, something that couldn't be undone. For years, I had been waiting for my family to recognize my worth, to treat me with the respect I had earned through my achievements. Today, I had finally understood that their recognition had never been the prize. The true prize was freeing myself from the need for their approval at all. As the city lights flickered outside my window, I felt something unfamiliar settle over me. A sense of peace, of rightness, of alignment with my own truth. The journey ahead wouldn't be easy. Old patterns rarely die without resistance. But for the first time, I was facing that journey not as the person my family had convinced me I was, but as the person I had always been beneath their projections, strong, capable, and worthy of respect, not because of who validated me, but because of who I had chosen to become. That was the real beginning of everything changing. Not the moment the limousine pulled up, but the moment I decided to drive away. The Monday morning of the board meeting arrived with unexpected clarity, both in the crystalline September sky, outside my window, and in my mind. I woke before my alarm, feeling strangely centered despite the importance of the day ahead. The presentation I would be delivering represented not just months of work, but a pivotal moment for Horizon Technologies' global strategy. As I moved through my morning routine, I realized something had fundamentally shifted over the weekend. The family drama that would have normally left me doubting myself, replaying critical comments in my head, and second-guessing my worth had instead crystallized my resolve. For the first time, I was approaching a high-stakes professional moment, without the shadow of my family's judgment clouding my confidence. I dressed with intention, a tailored navy suit that projected authority without ostentation, a silk blouse, in a vibrant teal that brought out the warmth in my complexion, and the simple silver earrings that had been a gift from my team after our last successful project launch. When I looked in the mirror, I saw someone who belonged exactly where she was, doing exactly what she was meant to do. My phone had accumulated 23 messages from various family members overnight. I scrolled through them briefly. Aunt Vivian demanding an explanation for my inexcusable rudeness, Uncle Gregory pressing for Richard's contact information, my mother vacillating between guilt trips and tentative recognition that perhaps I had been treated unfairly. Even Daphne had sent a message, suddenly interested in grabbing coffee to hear all about your amazing career. Instead of responding to any of them, I sent a single text to Trevor. Good luck with whatever you decide. Remember that the path that's right for you won't look like anyone else's idea of success. Then I silenced my phone, grabbed my portfolio, and headed to the office with a sense of purpose that felt like armor against whatever the day might bring. Horizon Technologies occupied the top 10 floors of a gleaming high-rise downtown. As I rode the elevator to the executive floor, I mentally rehearsed the key points of my presentation. The Singapore strategy represented 6 months of research, countless late nights, and collaborative effort from my team. It wasn't just a business proposal. It was a vision for how technology could bridge cultural differences rather than erasing them. The boardroom was already half full when I arrived. Richard nodded to me from across the room where he was chatting with the CFO. Other executives were settling into their seats, reviewing notes, or engaged in quiet conversation. I took my place at the table, arranging my materials with steady hands. "Maya," Richard said as he took his seat at the head of the table, "we're looking forward to your presentation. The expansion team has been raving about your cultural integration approach." Several board members nodded in agreement. These were people whose opinions I respected, whose expertise I valued, whose feedback, positive or negative, was based on the merit of my work rather than predetermined family narratives about my worth. As the meeting was called to order and preliminary matters were addressed, I found myself thinking about the contrast between this room and Aunt Vivian's backyard. Here, I was seen. Here, my voice mattered. Here, I had built a reputation based on my contributions rather than my conformity to someone else's expectations. When it was my turn to present, I stood with confidence born not of arrogance, but of preparation and self-knowledge. For 45 minutes, I walked the board through the comprehensive strategy for entering the Singapore market, the cultural nuances we needed to navigate, the technological adaptations required, the partnerships we'd need to cultivate. I fielded questions with thoughtful precision, acknowledged concerns without defensiveness, and built upon suggestions that strengthened our approach. By the time I concluded, the energy in the room was electric. The board voted unanimously to approve the expansion strategy, with Richard announcing that I would lead the implementation team. Colleagues offered congratulations as we filed out of the boardroom, several executives stopping to discuss specific aspects of the plan that had impressed them. I returned to my office feeling a profound sense of accomplishment, not just for the successful presentation, but for having done it without the cloud of familial doubt that had so often diminished my professional achievements in my own eyes. My assistant, Priya, knocked on my door an hour later. "Congrats on the board approval," she said with genuine enthusiasm. "But, there's something you should know. There's a woman in reception insisting on seeing you. She says she's your aunt and it's a family emergency." I felt a flicker of anxiety, immediately followed by calm resolve. "Aunt Vivian is here? At my office?" Priya nodded. "Security called up. She's being pretty insistent. Should I have them send her away?" I considered the question carefully. My first instinct was to avoid the confrontation, to preserve the professional space I'd created free from family dynamics. But something about Aunt Vivian coming to my territory, rather than summoning me to hers, felt like an opportunity to establish a new pattern on my own terms. "No, it's okay. Have security escort her up, but give me 10 minutes first." After Priya left, I took a moment to center myself. This wasn't about proving anything to Aunt Vivian or seeking her approval. This was about standing firmly in who I was, boundaries intact, regardless of her reaction. When Aunt Vivian swept into my office 10 minutes later, she looked simultaneously out of place and determined to own the space. She wore a designer suit that screamed old money, her hair perfectly coiffed, her makeup impeccable. But there was something unfamiliar in her expression, a hint of uncertainty that I'd never seen before. "Maya," she said, taking in my corner, office with its floor-to-ceiling windows and modern furnishings. Her eyes lingered on the industry awards displayed on my credenza, the framed cover of Business Week featuring our company, the multiple computer screens displaying complex data, visualizations. "Your receptionist made me wait. Do you know who I am?" "Hello, Aunt Vivian," I said calmly, not rising from my desk. "Yes, my assistant was following standard protocol for unscheduled visitors. What can I do for you today?" She blinked, momentarily, thrown by my composed demeanor. "Well, I've been trying to reach you since Sunday. You haven't returned any of our calls or messages. Your mother is beside herself with worry. I've been preparing for a board meeting, I said. It just concluded successfully, thank you for asking. A flicker of irritation crossed her face. Maya, this attitude is unbecoming. I came all the way down here to speak with you in person about what happened at the reunion. I think you owe us an explanation for your behavior. My behavior? I kept my voice level, professional. I attended the family reunion as expected. I brought the requested dish. I served food when you asked me to. And I left when a work emergency required my attention. Which part requires explanation? She waved her hand dismissively. Don't be obtuse. You know exactly what I mean. Leaving with Richard Matthews without properly introducing him to the family, refusing to facilitate Gregory's investment proposal, ignoring our calls afterward. It's disrespectful. I see. I leaned back in my chair, studying her. Aunt Vivian, why did you make me serve appetizers at the reunion? The question seemed to catch her off guard. What? That's hardly relevant. Someone needed to help. Was I the only someone available? Was Daphne helping? Trevor? Any of my other cousins? That's different. They what? Have more important careers? More prestigious connections? More value in the Cooper family hierarchy? Her mouth opened, then closed again. For perhaps the first time in our relationship, Aunt Vivian seemed at a loss for words. I continued, my voice remaining calm but firm. For years, I've accepted being treated as less important, less successful, less worthy of respect at family gatherings. I've listened to subtle digs about my career, my apartment, my life choices. I've watched as my accomplishments were dismissed, while others were celebrated for achievements that required half the effort. That's simply not true, she protested, but there was a flicker of recognition in her eyes. Isn't it? When was the last time anyone in the family asked me about my work with genuine interest? When was the last time my promotion was celebrated the way Patricia's husband-making partner? Thus, when was the last time I was treated as an equal, rather than the family member who never quite measured up? She shifted uncomfortably. You've always been so independent, Maya. We assumed you didn't need the same kind of support. Independence and invisibility aren't the same thing, Aunt Vivian. And they certainly don't justify being treated like the help at family gatherings. She flushed slightly. That's an exaggeration. We simply asked you to assist. You didn't ask. You instructed. There's a difference. A knock at my door interrupted us as Priya poked her head in. Sorry to interrupt, but Richard needs you in the conference room. The Singapore team is on the video call. Thank you, Priya. Please tell him I'll be there in 5 minutes. After Priya left, I turned. Back to Aunt Vivian. I need to go. I'm leading a global expansion project that requires my attention. So that's it? You're choosing work over family? There was a hint of her usual imperious tone, but it seemed hollow now, as if she herself didn't quite believe in its power anymore. No, Aunt Vivian. I'm choosing to be valued and respected over being diminished and dismissed. I'm choosing environments where my contributions matter over spaces where my worth is predetermined by someone else's narrow definition of success. I stood, indicating our conversation was concluding. I love my family, but I won't sacrifice my self-respect to maintain relationships that require me to be less than I am. She remained seated, studying me with an expression I couldn't quite read. You've changed, she finally said. No, I corrected her gently. I haven't changed. I've simply stopped allowing others to define me. There's a difference. Something shifted in her expression, not quite understanding, but perhaps the beginning of recognition. She stood slowly. Your mother wants you to come to Sunday dinner this weekend. Please tell her I can't make it this Sunday. I'm flying to Singapore on Saturday to meet with our partners there. I moved toward the door. But I'd be happy to have lunch with her when I return in 2 weeks. Just her and me. I see. Aunt Vivian smoothed her already immaculate jacket. Well, I suppose I should let you get back to your global expansion project. There was a note of something, almost like respect in her voice, grudging perhaps, but present nonetheless. As I walked her to the elevator, she looked around at the bustling office, the teams of professionals engaged in their work, several of whom nodded respectfully to me as we passed. "This is quite a position you've created for yourself," she said, as we waited for the elevator. "It isn't a position I created," I corrected her. "It's a position I earned." The elevator arrived, and she stepped inside. As the doors began to close, she said something that surprised me. "Your grandfather would have been proud. He never did believe in following conventional paths either." Before I could respond, the doors closed, leaving me standing there with the unexpected weight of her words. My grandfather, Aunt Vivian's father, had been a maverick in his own right, building a business empire from scratch, despite lacking the prestigious education his peers had. He had died when I was young, but I had vague memories of his booming laugh and the way he would wink at me conspiratorially during family gatherings. Had there been a connection between us that I'd never fully understood? Had Aunt Vivian seen something of him in me all along? Something that challenged her own rigid adherence to social conventions and expectations? I pushed the thoughts aside as I headed to the conference room. The Singapore team was waiting, and there was important work to be done. The next 3 weeks passed in a whirlwind of activity. The trip to Singapore exceeded all expectations, with local partners responding enthusiastically to our culturally nuanced approach. My team worked seamlessly across time zones, adapting and refining the strategy based on real-time feedback. When I finally returned to my apartment, jet-lagged but exhilarated, I found a surprising package waiting for me. It was a small, carefully wrapped box with a card from Trevor. Inside was a beautiful fountain pen with a note. "For signing whatever, contracts, manifestos, or declarations of independence you need. I withdrew from law school yesterday, starting art classes next month. Thank you for showing me it could be done." I smiled, feeling a complex mixture of pride, hope, and validation. Trevor's decision wouldn't be easy. The Cooper family machine would resist his deviation from the prescribed path with all its considerable force. But he had taken the first step toward authentic living, and I knew firsthand the power of that choice. My phone rang, displaying my mother's number. We had spoken briefly while I was in Singapore, careful, tentative conversations that skirted around the edges of what had happened at the reunion. I had promised to call her when I returned. "Hello, Mom," I answered, settling onto my couch. "Maya, you're back. How was the trip? Your aunt said you were doing something important with international clients." There was a new note in her voice, something that sounded almost like genuine interest. "It went very well," I said, cautiously, optimistic about her tone. "The Singapore partners are fully on board with our approach." "That's wonderful, dear." She paused. "I was hoping we could have that lunch you mentioned, just the two of us." "I'd like that," I said, meaning it. "Tomorrow?" "Tomorrow would be perfect." Another pause. "Maya, I've been thinking about what you said to your aunt, about how we've treated you over the years." I waited, not rushing to fill the uncomfortable silence. "I'm not sure I realized. That is, I never intended." She sighed. "It's difficult to admit when you've been wrong about something important, especially when that something is how you've treated your own daughter." The admission, incomplete as it was, represented a seismic shift. My mother, who had always prioritized family harmony and conformity above all else, was acknowledging that perhaps the patterns we had established weren't healthy or fair. "Thank you for saying that, Mom," I said gently. "It means a lot to hear." "Well," she said, her voice steadier now, "it seems I have a lot to learn about who you've become while I was busy worrying about what others might think. Perhaps you could start by explaining exactly what it is you do at Horizon Technologies. I'd like to understand, truly. It wasn't a grand epiphany or a complete transformation. It was a small opening, a hairline crack in the fortress of family dynamics that had defined our relationship for decades. But in that crack, I could see the possibility of something new growing, a relationship based on who we actually were, rather than who we were expected to be. I'd like that, I said. And I'd like to hear more about your watercolor class, the one you mentioned last year but never talked about again. Oh. She sounded surprised and pleased. You remembered that? Yes, I've actually kept it up. My instructor says I have a good eye for light. As we talked, I found myself looking out my window at the city lights, thinking about the strange, circuitous path that had led me here. Not just to professional success or personal independence, but to this moment of authentic connection with my mother. It had taken a dramatic confrontation, painful honesty, and the courage to stand firm in my own worth to create the possibility for real change. 3 months later, I stood at the podium in Horizon's main auditorium, presenting the results of the Singapore expansion to the entire company. Richard had asked me to share not just the business metrics, which were impressive, but the approach that had made the expansion so successful. The key wasn't imposing our methods on a different culture, I explained to the assembled employees. It was recognizing that true innovation happens at the intersection of diverse perspectives. We succeeded because we valued difference rather than trying to eliminate it. As I spoke, I caught sight of an unexpected figure slipping into the back of the auditorium. Trevor, his hair longer now, dressed in the casual clothes of an art student rather than the formal attire of a lawyer in training, gave me a subtle thumbs up. After the presentation, as colleagues offered congratulations and asked questions, Trevor made his way to the front of the room. "Impressive stuff, cuz," he said with a genuine smile, though I only understood about half of the technical terms. I laughed. "What are you doing here? Aren't you supposed to be in class?" "Finished early today. Thought I'd surprise you." He glanced around at the sleek, modern space. "This is where you work every day? No wonder you never cared about Aunt Vivian's opinion of your career choices." "How are the art classes going?" I asked as we walked toward my office. His face lit up with an enthusiasm I'd never seen during his law school days. Amazing. Challenging in ways I never expected. "My professors say I have potential, but more importantly, I actually want to get up in the morning." "And the family reaction?" His expression turned more complex. "About what you'd expect. Dad's barely speaking to me. Mom alternates between treating it like a phase and pretending it isn't happening. Aunt Vivian suggested I might consider art law as a sensible compromise. And how are you handling it?" He grinned. "Better than I would have 3 months ago. Every time I start doubting myself, I remember what you said about their approval not being the prize we thought it was. It helps." We reached my office, and he looked around with appreciation at the space I'd created, professional but personal, with local art on the walls and a small Zen garden on the windowsill. "You know," he said, settling into the chair across from my desk, "you've started something of a revolution in the family. Patricia's husband quit the law firm last month to start his own practice focusing on environmental law, something he's apparently been passionate about for years, but never pursued because it wasn't prestigious enough. And I overheard Daphne telling Mom she's considering a career change too." I raised my eyebrows. "Seriously? Daphne might leave investment banking? She's been miserable for years, apparently. Who knew?" He shrugged. The Cooper family motto might as well have been, "Suffer in silence for status." I laughed at the accuracy of his assessment. "And what about you? Are you happy with your decision?" His expression turned thoughtful. "I'm terrified sometimes. I have no idea if I'll be successful by anyone's definition, let alone the Cooper standard. But I'm living honestly for the first time in my life, and that feels Right. He pulled a small portfolio from his messenger bag. Actually, I brought something to show you. It's a project for my mixed media class. He handed me a series of striking collage pieces that combined photography, painting, and digital elements. The theme was immediately apparent: identity, authenticity, and the masks we wear for different audiences. The final piece in the series showed a figure stepping out of a box labeled with expectations and restrictions, reaching toward a horizon full of uncertain but vibrant possibility. "Trevor, these are extraordinary," I said, genuinely impressed. "You've been hiding this talent all this time?" He shrugged, but couldn't hide his pleasure at my reaction. "I used to draw all the time as a kid, remember? But then came the Cooper expectation to follow the approved professional paths, and I just stopped. It wasn't until I saw you stand up at the reunion, refusing to play the role they'd assigned you, that I started to consider I might have a choice too." His words hit me with unexpected force. I had never considered that my own journey toward authentic self-worth might create space for others to do the same. That the ripples from that moment in Aunt Vivian's backyard might extend beyond my own, life into the lives of others trapped in the same expectations. "I have something for you," I said, opening my desk drawer. I pulled out an invitation and handed it to him. "Horizon is hosting a gallery event next month featuring emerging artists. Local collectors and critics will be there. You should submit your work." His eyes widened. "Are you serious? I'm nowhere near ready for something like that." "Your work says otherwise," I countered. "But more importantly, you'll never know what you're capable of if you don't step beyond what feels safe and certain." He took the invitation, his expression a mixture of terror and excitement. The same expression I had seen in my own mirror many times over the past few months as I'd pushed my own boundaries professionally and personally. "Maybe I will," he said, tucking the invitation carefully into his portfolio. As he left my office with a promise to think about the gallery submission, I turned back to the emails and reports awaiting my attention, but my mind kept returning to our conversation, to the unexpected way my own journey had intersected with his. The lesson I had learned standing in Aunt Vivian's backyard with a tray of hors d'oeuvres, watching Richard Matthews step from his limousine, hadn't just been about freeing myself from others' limiting perceptions. It had been about the power of living authentically in a world that constantly pressures us to conform, to diminish, to contort ourselves into shapes that please others but wound our spirits. It had been about recognizing that our worth isn't determined by others' validation, but by our own courage to honor our unique gifts and contributions. And perhaps most importantly, it had been about understanding that when we stand in our truth, we create permission for others to do the same. Not through grand gestures or dramatic confrontations, but through the quiet, consistent choice to value ourselves enough to demand respect, to pursue our gifts, and to create lives that reflect our deepest values rather than others' expectations. That was the real transformation that had begun the day the limousine pulled up and the CEO stepped out. Not just in how others saw me, but in how I saw myself, and how that vision created ripples of possibility that extended far beyond my own life into the lives of everyone around me. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.